and the peace that a person finds in living their existence and in practicing their deen and their religion. And oftentimes the biggest challenges that we deal with are in terms of our business dealings, our family situations, the issues at home, our interpersonal relations with friends, with community members. We are social beings by creation. And a lot of our challenges stem from that social interaction that is a necessary part of human life. But in that character of the Prophet ﷺ, in good khuluq, in that the proper manners of the Prophet ﷺ, that is where we will be able to find consistency, because a person finds contentment and satisfaction. A person realizes that I can possibly influence, but I cannot control somebody else's behavior. I cannot control someone else's behavior. What I can do is I can influence. And I will only be able to influence somebody else's behavior when I am able to control my behavior. And that is by rising above. That is by implementing the proper character. That is by finding my own grounding. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. In that noble character of the Prophet ﷺ. And the first and the foremost of those qualities of the Prophet ﷺ that he embodied, that he lived, was the quality of empathy. The Prophet ﷺ was empathy personified. Empathy is not just to understand, but to literally be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. To be able to completely understand. Be able to put yourself and imagine what that situation would be like and feel what that person is feeling. And then react accordingly to somebody else's situation. So when somebody comes, somebody does something, somebody says something, the reaction is not why. Why would somebody do that? How do I respond to them? What can I do back to them? How do I counter what this person is doing? The first reaction is to first understand exactly who this person is and where they're coming from. And be able to relate to this person and where they're coming from and what has led up to this situation. And then respond in accordance with them. And the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated this time and time again. The Prophet ﷺ embodied this character. Whether we're talking about people who were a minority demographic in society, Bilal radiallahu anhu was at the side of the Prophet ﷺ at all times. He was in the home of the Prophet ﷺ. He was by the side of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ never went anywhere without him. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ told the Sahaba radiallahu anhum to show compassion to him, because I care for him. Understanding who he was, where he was coming from, and what had brought him to this point. Abdullah bin Maktoum radiallahu anhu, who was blind. He was facing major challenges that the majority of the people didn't. The Prophet ﷺ gave him a position of respect and dignity and honor. And the Prophet ﷺ appointed him as a mu'adhin. The Prophet ﷺ appointed him in charge of Medina when he would travel outside of Medina. On campaigns and on battles, he would leave him in charge of the whole city, a blind man. To give him the dignity and the respect that he deserved as a human being, as a believer, as a brother. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ would show love and compassion and kindness to young people, to children, to youth. When a young man asks the Prophet ﷺ for permission to commit zina in an open gathering, in a collective, like in a group, during the class of the Prophet ﷺ with the Sahaba, the teacher is Muhammad Rasulullah, the students are Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, radiallahu anhu. And somebody in that class requests permission to go and commit zina with a specific woman. Can you imagine what the reaction would be? The hadith says, فَأَقْبَلَ الْقَوْمُ عَلَيْهِ فَأَقْبَلَ الْقَوْمُ عَلَيْهِ فَزَجَرُوهُ. The people turned to him and they started to reprimand him. How dare you? What's wrong with you? And the Prophet ﷺ told everyone to be quiet and to relax and calm down. And the Prophet ﷺ understood where he was coming from. A young man who doesn't know any better, who hasn't been taught any better, who's never been told any better. And then he engaged with him in a very basic, but at the same time thought-provoking thought-provoking discussion. Did you ever consider if somebody said something like that about your family members? The young man said, never looked at it that way. And the problem was solved. When a Bedouin, when a non-Muslim man walks into the masjid and urinates in the masjid, understanding maybe he doesn't know that this is not right. And when he speaks to him, he finds out exactly that to be the reality. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ was the embodiment of this characteristic and this quality. Whenever we talk to anyone, whenever we deal with anyone, and this is something that a lot of times, you know, we're having the khatib workshop. We have students here that we are training to give khutbah, to give speeches, to give halaqas. For them, this is something you need to understand very, very, extremely important. If you cannot internalize this quality, then you will do more damage than benefit. You will cause more harm than benefit. You will cause more problems. You will become a part of the problem and not a part of the solution. When you preach and you teach and you will speak to people, but you will not have the ability to be able to understand who they are and where they're coming from. But even if somebody's not a khatib, and somebody's not a community leader, somebody's not an imam and not a scholar and not a speaker, we are still at the end of the day family members and community members. If you're a parent raising a child, don't just yell at your child. Understand maybe what's going on with the child. Try to understand how maybe frustrating it is for them. If you have a teenager, try to understand why they're acting the way that they're acting. If you have elderly parents, senior parents, understand what it must be like to witness and to experience your whole body falling apart in front of your very eyes. Think about how frustrating it must be to wake up in the morning and not know where you're at. So when they snap at you or they're angry or they're difficult to deal with, understand why that is. When your parents, as a young brother, as a young sister, when your parents are asking you not to go out past a certain hour at night, understand why. Understand what they understand about the world you live in. What they read on the news, what they see on TV, the stories they hear, and how they literally, every single time something happens to you, every single time they hear about the possibility of something occurring with you, how they literally stop breathing for a second for a moment. If we learn this quality of empathy, we'd be able to relate to each other, we'd be able to understand each other. We'd be better homes, better families, better communities. It's the biggest problem, biggest complaint. Take a survey of Muslims all across the country and ask them, what do you think your masjid needs? What does your masjid lack? What bothers you? What frustrates you? What disappoints you about your community, about your masjid, about your community, or your organization? And facilities will be very low down on the list. It will be how they're treated, how they're spoken to, how they're approached, how they're reproached. That's the number one thing. That's the number one issue. We did a survey of people attending Jummah khutbah all across the country and asked them about feedback. What are the biggest issues that they come to in Jummah khutbah? You know one thing nobody, not a single person put in the response was this. Nobody cared what the sound system was like. Not a single survey came back saying that the sound system was not good. And that's my complaint about Jummah khutbah. It was about what are people saying? How are people being spoken to? How are people addressing the topics? Very, very important quality of the Prophet ﷺ, a quality that is emphasized in the Quran and in the Book of Allah. And if we're able to understand and internalize and realize this, we will be a lot better off individually, as families, and as communities. Inshallah, if the brothers can all scoot forward just a little bit, make some more room in the back. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Qur'an al-azim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum.